Among the directors that have helped shape the horror genre the most, John Carpenter stands among the greats. With genre definers like Halloween and oddball scares like Prince of Darkness under his name, Carpenter's work has left its mark on generations. But the career of John Carpenter was also marked by frustration, shifting audience opinions, and lost projects that stand as exciting what-ifs in his filmography. Had Carpenter taken a different route in his career, we may have been witness to even more great movies, or possibly missed out on some he did actually make. Some unmade Carpenter projects were eventually brought to life by other creators. Others never saw the light of day. In either case, it's a fascinating what-if career for a creator who is defined as much by his successes as his setbacks. So let's take a trip through the alternate career path that could have awaited the horror master in this history of unmade John Carpenter movies. What would have been Carpenter's first credit on a feature film is Prey in 1975, written by Carpenter and set to be directed by Bob Clark, who had recently found success with Black Christmas. Clark, who was not a career horror director, told Carpenter this would be his last in the genre. The story follows 3 women on a mountain climbing trip attacked by cannibal mountain men descended from inbred Confederate holdouts in the woods. It's A Little Hills Have Eyes, predates the Wrong Turn franchise by decades, and already has the seeds of Halloween in its story focused on a small group of women. However, the film never moved forward. Another horror movie that predates Halloween, Carpenter wrote a nuclear power plant set thriller in 1977, loosely based on Thomas Scotia and Frank Robinsoth's 1976 novel The Prometheus Crisis. The story features a power plant crew hunted down by a hazmat suit-wearing killer in the midst of a nuclear meltdown, blending slasher thrills with political subtext. All the elements of the slasher are here, complete with our small group of characters picked off one by one. And just like the anonymity of Michael Myers, the killer in Meltdown has his identity hidden, lacks any backstory or real motivation, and is referred to as the figure in the script. Years later, and the director summed up the story as Halloween in a nuclear power plant, which, when combined with Prey, shows how the core elements of his genre-defining slasher were in place. They just needed the right team to make it, and the right collaborator in Deborah Hill to refine it. It's no secret that Carpenter is a huge Western fan, and that the genre and director Howard Hawks are his biggest influences. Yet, the director never actually made a Western himself. That would have all changed if Carpenter had shot El Diablo in 1980. The film, a comedy Western about a pair of cowboys chasing after a criminal, was co-written by Carpenter and Tommy Lee Wallace. But the director decided not to move forward with it out of nervousness in following the footsteps of his idols. After sitting on the shelf for a decade, El Diablo was eventually directed by Peter Markle, produced by Carpenter and Hill, and released in 1990 to a poor reception. Of all the movies in this list, El Diablo is one of the biggest what-ifs. If successful, it could have set Carpenter on a path away from horror. If not, it might have been a huge stumbling block early in his career. In its place, Carpenter made The Fog. In 1983, Carpenter was hired to direct Eric Van Lustbader's 1980 novel, The Ninja, a product of the martial arts boom of the time, after Irvin Kershner was taken off the project. And while Carpenter wrote a new draft with frequent collaborator Tommy Lee Wallace, with the ninja action revenge story changed more into a slasher horror, which isn't that surprising given Carpenter's focus at the time. Most of it would have been shot in New York, said Carpenter, but The Ninja would still have been the most expensive martial arts movie ever made. Producers found the script unfilmable, and after lengthy disagreements, he left the movie and briefly considered adapting the Vietnam War helicopter pilot novel Chicken Hawk. The Ninja was never adapted, but has been ripped off in many different stories, and Carpenter would fulfill his martial arts interest years later with Big Trouble in Little China. For one very strange moment in 1984, Carpenter almost directed Santa Claus the movie, with Alexander and Ilya Salkind, who had produced Superman the movie, interested in his work. However, once the studio was interested in him helming the film, Carpenter stated that the script sucked, and he wanted to rewrite it, be the one to score it, hire either Brian Dennehy or Wilford Brimley as Santa, and have final cut. The Salkind said, "We just want you to direct, dude." So he said see ya, and they made the poorly received movie without him. It would have been insane to see Carpenter direct a Saint Nick movie right after The Thing and Christine, but it probably wouldn't have been like a crazy horror Christmas movie like Santa's Sleigh or something. When you bring up what could have been in Carpenter's career, you have to mention his involvement with the Halloween franchise. I have, however, already done an in-depth exploration of unmade Halloween sequels, so for the sake of completeness, I'll just do a passing mention here. Carpenter and Hill eventually agreed to produce Halloween 4 with a script by Dennis Etchison, but when Mustafa Akkad rejected the script, the pair sold their portion of Halloween rights and left the franchise. In the early 90s, Carpenter pitched sending Michael Myers into space for Halloween 6. When Jamie Lee Curtis was brought back for H2O, she wanted Carpenter and Hill to return too, but Carpenter's asking price was too high, so they weren't involved. In 2003, Carpenter was courted for a Halloween and Hellraiser crossover alongside Clive Barker, but Akkad decided against it. Of course, Carpenter eventually came back to compose for David Gordon Green's new trilogy, but that's a solid 3 decades of the horror master almost, but never quite making another Halloween. The early years of Carpenter's career saw the rise of another major horror figure, Stephen King. Not only did King's novels take over the world, but they made for a string of hit adaptations from Carrie in 1976 and onward. After securing the rights to King's 1980 novel Firestarter, Universal Pictures brought Carpenter on board to bring the adaptation to life, with Carpenter signing on while working on The Thing for the studio. Carpenter took Bill Lancaster's script and hired Bill Phillips to do a rewrite, hoping to hire Richard Dreyfuss as the father at the center of the story. As you probably know, The Thing was a big financial disappointment, and contemporary critical backlash was savage. With Universal's faith in Carpenter shaken, they slashed the budget for Firestarter from $27 million to $15 million. With the major changes that would have been needed, Carpenter left the project, but also took some money with him under his pay-or-play contract with the studio. According to Phillips, he took the money and with it bought a Bell Jet Long Ranger helicopter, which he later rented out to the LA Olympics. Afterward, Carpenter went to Columbia Pictures for a different King adaptation, Christine. The Firestarter that was eventually made is fine, but you can't help but wonder what this movie would have been like if Carpenter had directed, and how the horror master's career would have gone if a more successful Thing and a strong Firestarter would have been made back to back. As it is, the reception to The Thing began to sour Carpenter on big movie studio projects, and the use of Sutter Kane in the Mouth of Madness in 1994 can be seen as a small dig at King. Decades later, and Firestarter was remade in 2022, with John Carpenter this time creating the film's music, which is the only thing that matters about that movie. Around 1985, Carpenter was slated to direct Armed and Dangerous, a cop comedy developed by Harold Ramis and set to star Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi. Ramis comedies and Carpenter horror both help to define very different sides of 80s genre movies, but it's fascinating to see that these two parallel tracks almost collided. However, Carpenter dropped out due to Aykroyd's script demands, with the movie eventually directed by Mark L. Lester and starring John Candy. As a side note, it was around this time that Carpenter turned down Top Gun, and was also offered the Eddie Murphy starring The Golden Child, while also offered the similar Big Trouble in Little China, with Carpenter choosing Big Trouble. Fred Dekker and Shane Black, who had collaborated on multiple projects including The Monster Squad, got Universal, Carpenter, and producer Walter Hill interested in their long-in-development screenplay Shadow Company in 1988. The action horror script sees a platoon of dead, scientifically altered Vietnam War soldiers rising from the grave and attacking a small California town. Now, the war has come home, and the only living AWOL member of the company must try to stop his old squad mates. And while the script was one of several by the duo that attracted interest, it never moved forward, marking the start of Carpenter's 4-year break between They Live and Memoirs of an Invisible Man. It was around this time that Carpenter was also offered The Exorcist III, but disagreements over the script's ending caused him to not accept, and William Peter Blatty to direct the adaptation of his own work instead. Famously, the studio forced Blatty to change that ending in reshoots. During this time, Carpenter became the first of many directors attached to John Raffo's script Pincushion, a Mad Max-inspired post-apocalyptic wasteland story centered on a woman named Mary, who must deliver a child genetically engineered to cure the plague that destroyed the world. Cher was set to play Mary, and the movie would have tons of car action sequences. But as the budget escalated to $20 million, the movie stalled and was never made, despite many different directors and actors attached in the years that followed. The creature from the Black Lagoon is an oddity among the larger Universal Monsters canon because, despite how iconic it is, the story has never been remade. But it's not for lack of trying. John Landis tried to remake Creature for a large chunk of the 80s, with his insistence on the movie being in 3D being a major stumbling block. After that project died, Carpenter entered the picture in 1992. At this point, Carpenter's career was again on an upswing, with the director helming Memoirs of an Invisible Man. The movie's $40 million budget and stars like Chevy Chase and Daryl Hannah made Carpenter attractive to big studios, and Universal Studios president Tom Pollock courted the director. He said, "Look through our library of pictures and see if there's anything you want to make," said Carpenter. The first thought that came to mind was Creature from the Black Lagoon. Carpenter decided to set the film in the modern-day Amazon, disregard the remake script written by Nigel Neal in the 80s, and hire Bill Phillips for a hard R remake filled with horror violence. Regarding the new take, Carpenter said, "It would be interesting to combine that with creation scientists, who are trying to prove that man walked with dinosaurs 10,000 years ago. They try to prove the literal, biblical origin of life, in total contradiction of scientific fact. I would also love to work in a little Lovecraftian feel. I'm thinking of The Shadow over Innsmouth, fish mating with humans. There has been a legend about this man-fish, so perhaps there was a race of them living in the Amazon. Supposedly, there are hidden pyramids in the Amazon, so I want to try to get that in there." To bring the iconic creature into modern film, Carpenter hired special effects master Rick Baker, with designs leaked online years later showing a faithful but less rubbery creature. Here, it's a violent villain named Pete Hazard that leads the expedition, seeking to kill the creature that almost killed him 5 years prior, which collides with lead love interest and Greenpeace member Siri. The creature, driven to graphic violence out of survival, forcibly transforms from water breather to air breather on screen for what would have been some cool Baker effects. Eventually, we find underwater pyramids of an ancient race that shows the creature as the last of his kind, with the creature wounded but still alive by the end as our final couple escapes. The creature is shown to save other captured animals, putting him in direct opposition to the Mad Hunter Hazard, whose head he eventually crushes into his own body. With so many terrible people as the creature's victims, the sympathetic monster of the original is almost the full-blown hero here. Unfortunately, Memoirs, whose big-budget instigated work on Creature, was a big flop, giving Universal cold feet on Carpenter once again. The project never got the green light and quietly died. Of all the Unmade movies featured here, this is the one I most want to see. After the success of Jaws in 1975, everyone wanted in on the sea creature boom, including Peter Benchley himself, with the Jaws author writing the giant squid novel Beast in 1991. So when the book rights were bought by Universal, the studio once again contacted Carpenter. But do I really need to explain what happened? Carpenter delivered a script that would cost roughly $30 million to make. Universal said it was too expensive, and they parted ways, with The Beast eventually turned into a 1996 two-part TV miniseries. In 1996, John Carpenter and Kurt Russell made an unexpected return to the dystopian world of Snake Plissken with Escape from LA. Part rehash of Escape from New York, part commentary on California excess and religious extremism, LA wasn't all that well received critically or financially. Still, Carpenter and Russell hope to one day return with Escape from Earth, set after Snake shuts down the entire planet's technology, and with Earth now a war-ravaged hellscape. The story was never scripted, but would have largely been set in outer space, as Plissken looks for a new world, and presumably does the exact same things he's done for 2 movies straight. But studios weren't interested due to both LA's poor performance and the dark outlook of the story. Still, Carpenter and Russell held out hope. Basically, the Escape franchise, which is weird to say, has never gotten off the ground after LA. The duo shopped the story as a 100-episode TV series, but it was never optioned. A video game titled Snake Plissken's Escape was in development but never finished. A rumored anime version of Escape from Earth was never realized. And a long-threatened remake was never made despite both Robert Rodriguez and Lee Whannell attached at different points. By the late 90s and early 2000s, Carpenter had an itch to revisit some of his previous work. Columbia Pictures was interested in making a sequel to Vampires, but when they wanted it to be direct-to-video, Carpenter took on a producer role and let Tommy Lee Wallace direct and write what would become Vampires Los Muertos. Probably for the best. Vampires sucks, guys. The 2001 sci-fi horror Ghosts of Mars ends with a cliffhanger, showing Carpenter's interest in making more, but Ghosts of Mars not doing well and generally being doo-doo kept that from happening. Also, don't be mad at me for saying that. According to star Natasha Henstridge, Carpenter would come to set every day and proclaim to cast and crew that it was the biggest piece of shit I've ever made. It was also around this time that The Thing, once a reviled flop, had become thoroughly reevaluated as one of the horror greats. The 2002 video game The Thing serves as a sequel, and when it was successful, another game was announced, with Carpenter set to help work on it. However, studio troubles meant it never went past concept art. Thing Fever also led to the Sci-Fi Channel announcing a 4-hour miniseries sequel in 2005. This time set 23 years later in New Mexico. This also didn't go anywhere, and instead we got the prequel no one remembers. After his career as a director mostly came to a close in the early 2000s, Carpenter became an avid video game fan, which led to his near involvement with several games. In 2005, Titan Productions announced Psychopath, a first-person action game about a retired agent trying to stop a serial killer, which would have Carpenter involved in story creation and cutscenes, with the intent that the game would then be adapted into a film, with Carpenter directing and co-writing with Todd Farmer. However, development stalled early on. Carpenter also consulted on Fear 3. Remember the Fear franchise? At first announced as working on the story with comic book writer Steve Niles, and later being credited as consulting on the game's cutscenes. How much Carpenter was truly involved is unclear, but 3's lead artist Heinz Schuller said they wrote him a check to get his name on the game and they got some ideas from him. Probably. Carpenter is also a big fan of the Dead Space franchise. Me too, John, me too. And expressed interest in bringing it to the big screen, saying, "I would love to make Dead Space into a film. I'll tell you that right now. That one is ready-made. It's an easy match, but so far, nothing has come from the director's interest." Carpenter's The Ward in 2010 is the director's last film to date. An underwhelming small horror movie, but a better note to go out on than Ghosts of Mars. However, it wasn't intended as the end, as it was announced the same year that he was attached to direct Darkchild, an adaptation of an edgy 1996 comic book about a girl who can shed her skin and transform into her worst nightmares. At the time of its announcement, Carpenter seemed pretty excited, saying, "Randy Queen's hijacked angel, Ariel Child, is the best young female character since Laurie Strode in Halloween. Bringing Ariel and her dark mysteries to life should be quite an adventure for us all." This is a very random comic for Carpenter to be attached to. It's one of the dozens of mid-90s post-boom edgy Spawn imitators like Witchblade or The Darkness or Pit, but way less famous. Even Weta Digital, the visual effects company behind Lord of the Rings, created test footage for it. However, nothing really happened after the announcement, which isn't that surprising. You'd be shocked at how many random comic books have been optioned and announced by studios over the years, each promising to be the next breakout hit, only for the rights to sit on the shelves until their deals lapse. In any case, the next movie for Carpenter never came, making The Ward his final feature film. In the time since, Carpenter has sworn off making movies, content to make music with his family, collect some paychecks, and play lots of video games. That is, until a recent interview where the director stated that he had a few projects lined up and percolating, including a return to directing. What will they be? When will they happen? At the age of 74, Carpenter has a whole host of untapped ideas that could finally be brought to life. Or it could be something entirely new. In any case, the potential for a return of the horror master is an exciting possibility built on decades of changing the genre forever. Thanks for watching today's video, and welcome to Halloween season. This is the first of many videos to come for the entirety of Halloween, and like many years past, I've decided to kick off the season with a return to my Unmade movies series. This is a slightly different take on it, as previous entries have focused on specific franchises and their sequels that never got made. But seeing as I'm a huge John Carpenter fan, I decided to give the horror master's filmography the same treatment. So hopefully you've enjoyed this look into the many what-ifs of John Carpenter's career. Any director that's been around for a long time has many unmade projects that they never get around to. Some seem like bullets that were dodged, and others seem like they could have been true classics. In either case, I really love thinking about the what-ifs of a talented director's career. And clearly, there were many projects that Carpenter almost made. Personally, I would have loved to have seen that Creature from the Black Lagoon remake, as I'm a huge fan of Creature, and I'm a huge fan of Carpenter. Carpenter's Firestarter would have been really interesting also, but in the end, I'm really happy that he made Christine, because I'm a big fan of that movie. I would love to hear which of these unmade John Carpenter movies you would have loved to have seen, and maybe which ones you're glad never got made. Also, if you enjoyed this video and you'd like for me to cover more unmade films from other directors' filmographies, let me know which ones you'd like for me to cover. George Romero and Guillermo del Toro in particular are ones that I feel like have a ton of interesting unmade movies. As always, a huge thank you to my patrons for their continued support. If you'd like to be a patron, it's only $1 a month for early access to every video and exclusive Patreon reviews. And for the Halloween season, I'm doing a ton of Patreon horror reviews. So if you'd like to listen to those, they will only be on Patreon. I'll be back again with another Halloween video very soon. And until next time, I hope that you're taking care of yourselves and watching some great horror movies. Happy Halloween!